Hi everyone, Paul from LiteBox Architecture. So today's video, I want to talk about what is your extension going to cost in 2024. So overall, we've seen a steady increase in building costs over the last 10 years. Now, when I first started my business, the average cost of a single story extension was probably about £25,000 to £30,000. Now, extensions have changed and clients have looked at, they do want more from their projects, so a lot more glazing, roof lanterns, roof lights, lots of lighting, etc., which has probably pushed costs up slightly. But there has been a steady increase, and there are certain factors that have affected this over the last 10 years. So what are those factors and what has affected the cost of your extension? Well, let's look at these. So we've got cost of materials and labour that has increased naturally, and so prices will rise over the sort of the last 10 years, and certainly within the last couple of years with the pandemic and shortages of materials, and everything seems to have gone up massively. Now, we've also got mortgage rates. Now, interest rates, mortgage rates have gone up considerably over the last year to 2 years, where we've seen a rise up to 6-7%, and they have now come down and settled around the 5%. Now, I'm not sure whether we're going to see any changes in the interest rates in the next year or two, whether they will drop down. Now, my personal feeling is that if interest rates drop down to maybe around 4%, that maybe we may find that clients will look to start building again because the cost of borrowing the money is slightly cheaper. What else has risen? So we've got energy costs that have risen. Now, energy costs have gone through the roof, and obviously people have felt the pinch in normal day-to-day life with their bills at home, but naturally this is pushing up the cost of building costs as well. We've also got VAT increase. Now, this is obviously 10 years, so probably 12 years ago, when the government decided to raise the VAT threshold to 20%, which meant an extra 5% increase on your cost of materials. So that has pushed up the cost, but a lot of clients don't always account for VAT when they get the quotations, and then have a little bit of a shock then when the 20% is added on to the quote. Now, cost of living's increased, as we touched on, so there's been an increase in generally all our costs in terms of energy, food, etc., and so that again eats into clients' budgets in terms of what they can afford. And obviously we have had in the last few years with the pandemic, COVID, etc., where we've seen a disruption in supply chains, and this has pushed the cost of materials up quite considerably. Now, if I'm honest, I don't expect that materials really are going to come back down in cost. I think now they've probably leveled out to an extent on a lot of materials, and we'll probably see this level of cost that will sit for a little bit of time, and if anything, that the cost will probably increase again at some point. So what does an extension cost in 2024? Well, looking at the figures around the Midlands area, we're looking at an average build cost of about £2,500 a metre squared for a single story extension, around £2,250 per metre squared for a double extension, but we have seen in other areas where this cost has increased to somewhere around £3,000 and even £4,000 in other areas, such as the southwest, the east of the country, Cambridge and that direction, and obviously your costs in London will be in excess of that. Now, this does depend on the location of your project, the complexity of your project, how complicated is the extension that you're building. If it's relatively straightforward, then potentially the cost might be slightly less, but if you've got a complex build with lots of bespoke areas, then naturally the cost is going to be more expensive. Now, a metre square rate isn't the best way to calculate cost of an extension. there will be other considerations to take into account when you're putting a price together or you're getting a price from your local builder. Now that could be internal works. So with a lot of extensions, you may be creating an open plan area, so you'd be knocking out existing walls, and so there are other works to do in the existing part of the house to knock through load-bearing walls or to create an open plan area. Now it may be that you've got a boiler that isn't up to scratch and the boiler needs to be upgraded in order to cope with the extended floor space that you've got, and additional radiators, heating. You may have utility areas or en suites or bathrooms, something like that you're adding to the extension where the boiler needs more capacity, and so therefore you're having to take the boiler out and replace it with a new, and obviously this will then have additional cost. We've then got rewiring. So it may be that your electrics in your existing house isn't great at the moment and it needs rewiring. Well, to be honest, this is a perfect time while you're doing the building work and you're extending to probably rewire the house and get the rest of that work done at the same time, so you haven't got to come back and disrupt your property and everything that you've finished already to put all that new rewiring cable in. Now, obviously, if you're having to rewire or you're having to put new consumer units in, then again, this is going to add extra cost to your extension and you need to consider this. Now, what else is there? So it's not always things like boilers and rewires and things like that. It may be additional items as a client that you would like in your extension that again is going to push the cost up, such as bifold doors, sliding doors, internal finishes, roof lanterns and roof lights. All of these things or bespoke items are going to push the cost up, and it's extra cost to include in the overall price. Now, another thing that can add cost to your extension is underfloor heating, and underfloor heating is becoming more and more common with extensions, and I do have another video on underfloor heating, so check that one out if you want to find out a little bit more about underfloor heating. But again, this is an additional cost to add in underfloor heating to your extension, and again will push the overall cost of your extension up. So although a cost per metre rate probably isn't the best way to calculate exactly what your extension is going to cost, it does give you a basic initial cost based on the metre squared of your extension, so times in the length by the width of your proposed building to give you some initial costs and an idea of what potentially your extension is going to cost you. Now, I imagine that there'll be people that will disagree with my figures and the rates and the overall costs that I've described here. But to be honest, don't have a go at me in the comments. And I don't want to hear about John Smith down the pub who built his extension and didn't incur those sorts of costs. The whole point of this video is to give homeowners a general idea of what their extension will cost in the UK. And, you know, John Smith may well have built his extension and it was cheaper than the rates that we've quoted, but that isn't realistic to what normal homeowners will probably get charged and probably incur in terms of costs in the UK. Now, you can reduce costs slightly by managing your own project. And by managing your own project, this would mean managing subcontractors. So you bring your own subcontractors in to do the various types of work that you need to do to build your extension, but that is down to you to manage. Now, I wouldn't advise this for clients unless you have 10 years experience of managing projects, because you can run into problems and that can cost you time and money. Now, if you think about what the builder has to go through in order to build and manage your project, you know, there is a lot of work involved and time in what they do in order to manage your project and get it built. Now, if you think very quickly in terms of what the builder needs to do, well, he needs to measure the areas accurately. He needs to allow for wastage. They need to work out the quantities and any other materials that they need to do that specific job. Then they need to order the materials. They need to arrange delivery of those materials. They need to store it safely on site and ensure that it isn't damaged. They need to make sure when it's delivered that there is no damage to any of the products or materials, and they need to make sure that the correct materials have been delivered. So they need to do all of this before they even start the job. Now, all this takes time, and that time has to be paid for, and that time's not cheap. So if you can appreciate what the builders have to do in order to manage your job and get your job built, and this is why we have the costs in order to build your extension. Now, to give you some examples of typical extensions and what the projects cost overall that we've completed in the last couple of years. I'll run through a couple of our jobs. So first of all, we've got a single story extension that we completed for a client locally. They wanted to have an open plan kitchen extension, and in order to achieve that, we needed to extend at the back and knock out a number of load-bearing walls. Now, the overall cost for this extension came in at around 80,000. Now, the job was a little bit more complex. We did have a lot of load-bearing walls that we needed to knock out in order to clear the space. We did have a public sewer, so the foundations needed to go deeper than possibly the normal metre deep. So there's an additional cost there. And also we had tight access in order to get machinery and materials and different things through to the rear of the property in order to build the extension. Now that 80,000 didn't include the kitchen. It did include the VAT, but obviously the client then finished off the rest of the project themselves, including the kitchen, some of the floor finishes, and bits and pieces. So that was the single story, that was one of our single story extensions. Now moving on to the next single story extension, which was a reasonably large extension to a detached property. Now this came in around 100,000 for the works, including the VAT. But the client had the full works done in terms of, it was quite a large extension. We had a utility area that we added on. They had an open plan, some existing works done, and some works to open up the existing hallway. And all these added into the cost, along with bifold doors, roof lights, and obviously the kitchen. So this was 100,000 all in, with all of those extra items, kitchen and the VAT. Now my third extension was a very small project that we worked on, and actually when you look at the photos, we only added the space to the left hand side of the building. We added an extension on, we reused the existing space that we had, we knocked that through and opened that up to create an open plan kitchen, living, dining area, and actually it turned into a really nice space once the project was finished. But this project came in at around 60,000. Now the client had normal doors on this project, but they had quite a long flat roof lantern, so that brought in extra natural daylight into the project, and this was including VAT, floor finishes. I believe that the client bought their kitchen that was additional to the £60,000 that the extension cost, but this was pretty much a completed project, along with a few additional works in the existing part of the house. Now my final single story extension, which again was a very small extension, 3 metres by approximately 2.5 metres wide. We opened up again the ground floor space in order to make a bigger kitchen dining area and bring in a lot more natural daylight. This was on a mid-terrace property, and the extension came in at around £50,000. Now there was additional work to do in the existing property. They did add in a downstairs toilet and bathroom area, and also we had some structural load-bearing walls that we needed to knock out, so that added to the extra expense. They had a large roof lantern on the top of the roof in order to maximise as much natural daylight as they could. So this one came in about £50,000. That was including a very basic kitchen and a very basic fit out. So you can see the average extension in the UK for 2024 is somewhere around £50,000 for a very basic extension, up to 80,000 for a slightly higher quality extension, including kitchens. Now, this does depend what clients' requirements are for their kitchen. So a kitchen can cost anywhere from £5,000 to £25,000 upwards. So that really will expand the budget slightly and increase cost depending on what your internal finishes are. But on average, at the moment, single story extension costs are around 50 to 80,000, depending on location, the complexity of the job, your finishes, and any bespoke requirements. So if this video has been really helpful, then please click the like button, please hit the subscribe button, helps our channel to grow and enables me to keep giving you good content. And equally, if you've got a project in mind, then please get in touch. Now you can get hold of us at www.liteboxarchitecture.co.uk. Equally, you can book one of our free consultations on our website, or simply drop us an email at info@liteboxarchitecture.co.uk. Pick up the phone or give us a call. Please check out our social media channels on Instagram and Facebook, and I'll see you on the next video. See you soon, guys.